Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are excited to host our friend and amazing surgeon, Kelsey Laporte. Thank you so much for joining us, Kelsey.
Hello.
Welcome, Kelsey.
Hi, thanks for asking me.
Dr. Laporte is a full scope oral maxillofacial surgeon practicing in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I just have to say, not only is she an amazing surgeon and doctor, but she is an awesome friend. Sarah and I are both good friends with Kelsey. The thing I love about Kelsey the most is she's got the sharpest wit around.
Yes, and always keeps it real.
She's like the meme queen. So find a friend that can send you the memes on a daily basis. I thought it would be fun to get started by just introducing ourselves in relation to each other. Kelsey, do you remember how you met me or how you and Sarah became friends?
Sarah and I met because she made a post on the Women in OMFS Facebook group about boards because she had not intended to get boarded because when she was in her residency program, she had an attending who told her, don't even bother to ever take boards because you're going to fail. So she didn't take them. And then she decided when she was right at the very end of the cutoff of when she was going to miss the eligibility to take them, that she wanted to take them, but she was very intimidated by them, right? They're very scary. And she made a post, and I had just taken them and found out that I passed the first time. And I just basically commented on the post, you can do this, just you got to have a strategy. You got to do lots of mock boards. You got to practice, but don't let it psych you out. If I can do it, you can do it. And then we started studying and doing mock board preparations together. And that's how we met. And then I think the very first time I met you in person was at a Women in OMFS meeting at the San Diego national meeting a couple of years ago. And then we kind of just crisscrossed paths several times after that and started chatting a little bit more and became good friends.
Yes, ma'am. That's what I remember too.
Kelsey's the real reason why I pass boards.
I know. Well, I love hearing that
And Sarah
story
passed boards. Yeah.
because
And she was 9 months pregnant with her son.
of course,
boards.
isn't that how it always goes? I love that story though because it's so demonstrative of Kelsey of who you are. Because I always tell people you were like the ultimate girl's girl. I've never met someone who is so good at being just genuinely in the court of other women without, being threatened or that competitive edge that happens a lot in female friendships. I think you are so good at showing up for that. And I love that even to a stranger, you were that person to show up. So I just really admire that about you.
Well, look what we got out of it. We got a good friendship.
I know.
That's right.
It's amazing.
And one of the big things I noticed was that a lot of times we find in those relationships that there's even that little bit of competitiveness that can be hurtful. But I think with Kelsey, it's been really awesome because the way that her competitiveness comes off is builds us all up. And so it's incredible because she's competing not against you, but with you on the team. So thank you for that.
Definitely.
That's a great compliment. I try to compete mostly with myself fiercely, and then with other people, women and men, I try to be not the boss, but the leader who's in the boat rowing with them, not standing on the shore telling them what to do. So that's kind of how I model myself. And I can honestly say that I learned that from a really great man and group of men who trained me. So I was very lucky to have that imprinted on me early in my career.
That's amazing. I don't think that we get that kind of leadership as often as we should in medicine. So I love to hear that. Well, we could talk for hours about all sorts of things with you, Dr. Laporte, but we invited you here today because we want to hear more on imposter syndrome. We had you speak to us at our first inaugural Elevate Summit for Women in Oral Surgery, and you presented an amazing lecture on this topic that I just thought was super transformative and really just the beginning of this conversation. And sounds like you're taking this talk on the road and been asked multiple times to present it again. And so there is a big interest and a need to hear more on this topic. So we're super excited to invite you to give us a little more what you found in your research. So my first question is, why did this talk resonate with you, this topic? When I asked you to speak, you knew right away that this is what you wanted to talk on. Why do you think that that was something that jumped to your brain first off?
When I was in dental school, I went to dental school to become a surgeon, and I knew that I wanted to be a surgeon. And I had this weird feeling or drive, not just that I wanted to be a surgeon, but that I was made to be a surgeon, that it was woven into the fabric of my being from even very
Wow.
early childhood experiences. And I don't know if this was just me manifesting myself, but even as an undergrad, when people were telling me that I was never going to be able to do that and have a family, and I was going to spend too many years in my education, or that I'd get distracted by a boy and it would never happen, I would have dreams about my future patients and what I could do for them, and the mission trips I'd be able to go on and things like that. And as much as I had a wonderful support in my mother, in my day-to-day life, I felt very, very alone and lonely. I thought that when I entered dental school, there would be less of that I would have more camaraderie, but in fact, it was the opposite. And I felt even less camaraderie in dental school. And I never had met a female oral surgeon. I had never heard of a female oral surgeon. And every oral surgeon I ever met told me that women don't become oral surgeons, and that it's not a good fit. And so I just kept working hard thinking, well, somebody's got to make it happen. My sophomore and junior years were very, very challenging because I studied all the time. I really didn't go out. I really didn't do anything else. And I started seeing these articles in the New York Times from Adam Grant and Sheryl Sandberg talking about women in the workplace. And this was sort of around the same time that Sheryl Sandberg released the Lean In book. And I started reading these articles, and they were presenting all of this organizational psychology research that validated every single thing I was experiencing. And it blew my mind because that whole time I just thought, all of this is just in my head. I'm putting this on myself. You know, I would have people say certain things to me or do certain things to me, and I would write it off as I was being oversensitive or reacting emotionally. And then this series came out, and I started saving these articles. And so from around like 2012 on, I had a Google folder of articles that I saved every time I came across some research that supported my experience. And it finally, over time, accumulated enough that I realized that the problem is not me. This is a legitimate thing. And a lot of people go through this. And it's something that I don't want anyone else to ever feel as lonely as I felt. So if I have the opportunity to talk about it publicly, I want to try and pursue that.
That's amazing. I love that you kept all the articles and were forthright and like thoughtful enough to do that and keep a folder and those, with
Well, when
the.
I was sad, I would read them.
Mhm.
When I was feeling sad and lonely and frustrated in dental school, I would read them. And, even in residency, sometimes I would read the articles and I would remind myself that it's not just in my head. This isn't just me. And the only way to change it is to change it. That's what I would always tell myself. The only way I'm going to change it is by changing it. And so I just have to do it. The only way to make it normal to be a surgeon and a mom and a professor is to be a surgeon and a mom and a professor.
Right.
And so I wanted to hopefully be that for somebody else so that nobody else ever felt that isolation that I had to feel when I was going through that.
That really resonates with me. I think conversations Sarah and I have had, I think we all have felt that. And I suspect many or most of our listeners have felt that. And there is something so validating about realizing all the gaslighting and this idea that you're just not emotionally secure enough or mature enough or whatever it is to handle it. It isn't anything to do with you. It's really about the societal constructs and the systems that we're placed in. I think that's so helpful to understand. So what's some of the information that you found in your research? What is imposter syndrome? And then how does it affect us, particularly as women in high-powered careers or minorities?
So the foundational idea of imposter syndrome, or originally termed imposter phenomenon, I use them interchangeably. It was first published in the early 70s by two female doctors, PhDs, who were mentoring postgrads who were working towards their PhDs. And what they noticed was that despite the immense level of success that these women were achieving, they all seemed to hold a similar belief that they either had come upon that success through happenstance or luck, or that they weren't really that intelligent and successful, and that they had in fact been fooling everybody the whole time, and that they were really frauds. And they started studying this concept, and initially they studied it and then as later generations started studying it, they observed that this imposter phenomenon can occur to anybody within any population who is marginalized or underrepresented or culturally routinely cited as less capable to do whatever it is that they want to do. So we do know that specifically it disproportionately affects high achieving women, high achieving minorities, but men are affected too. It just is a very situational phenomenon, but people who are high achieving tend to struggle with this more.
It's so interesting. I know I'm a victim of imposter syndrome. I think part of it was because I only applied to one residency program, which is crazy. I'm pretty confident if I've applied to multiple, like most people do, I probably would have matched the first year, but I didn't want to be in a long distance relationship with my husband for 5 to 10 years, which looked like would have been. So for me, I only applied to one position. And so it's not super surprising I didn't get in that first year. And so they took me as a non-cat intern, and I was able to get in the next year. But I think that really weighed heavily on me. I always felt like the dumb one in residency, and I was the only female. And I think there is a lot of male bravado a lot of times. So I feel like the guys would be like, I'm the man, look at me. And then I'd go home and be like, there are dishes in the sink. I'm a failure. And I saw all the bravado, and I thought since they're so confident, that meant there was something wrong with me. And so my program director, like the feedback I always had from me was be more confident, be more confident. And then it's like first day out of residency in private practice, I hit the ground running. I was so much more efficient than anyone expected. I was profitable pretty much from day one. I did great with the patients. And it was this really big mindset shift of like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm actually good at this, but no one ever told me. And so I always thought I was the dumbest in the room.
Yeah, I definitely had the same sort of experiences too with that. My first experience with imposter syndrome, I didn't even know what it was. And I had never felt that feeling before, but I remember sitting down on my very first day of dental school. I sat down in the chair in the first auditorium classroom that we had, and I looked at the podium, and it had Medical University of South Carolina. I was this gal from Virginia, went to Virginia Tech, an ag school. I was a business major with a German minor. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm here, but they messed up. They probably accidentally put my name on the yes list instead of the no list, which is probably where I was meant to be. And I'm like, oh dear, oh dear, I hope nobody notices. And I remember just that whole first summer, because I was taking anatomy and I didn't know any of the vocabulary. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't let anybody know. I can't let them know. And that was really what started it. And I'd never experienced that before. But of course, that just persisted and continued. It got a little better as I realized that I was pretty good at dental school. And then in residency, it just kind of all came rushing back again. So it's really interesting.
I think that's interesting that you mention it being a mistake that you were admitted, because this was one of the foundational principles of their research, is that generally speaking, women, when they succeed, they themselves and our culture attribute it to either luck or circumstances, meaning they got lucky, they had a good day, or maybe they had a topic that they happen to know a lot about, or simply that it was an error, or that they were the token admit. So in your mind, maybe you were the token business major admit because they needed somebody to, diversify their admissions profile, things like that. Whereas when men succeed culturally and then within themselves, they're more likely to attribute that to their own innate abilities and the hard work that they put in and their high qualifications. And that is one of the main constructs of this phenomenon that just feeds this vicious cycle.
Yeah, well, that's what I was talking about. When I feel like all the guys in my program are like, I'm the man. I cured cancer today, and I'm the man. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm good enough to do this.
I broke a root tip. I'm the worst. I don't deserve to be here.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And, or, I mean, like you were saying too, internalizing things even outside of your academic abilities, like going home and there's dirty dishes or the laundry isn't folded. Women are very likely to internalize those things as a reflection on their character, as opposed to a checklist that just needs to be completed. And then you start to see yourself by your weaknesses, as defining yourself by your weaknesses, and this feeds this cycle of this imposter phenomenon.
One of the things that really struck me about your lecture was talking about that internalization of those feelings and then kind of turning on your own minority group. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because that's something that I have noticed so much. It sometimes feels like women are the worst antagonists when it comes to harassment or discrimination or not supporting each other. You know, there are some women that are really wonderful, but sometimes when there's a woman who's not, it feels like they're almost worse than anyone. And do you think that that is part of this system of what's going on?
Yeah, so one of the articles that the New York Times published in their series was Sheryl Sandberg talking about the myth of the catty woman or the queen bee. And I just want to make sure I'm referencing this correctly. But basically, she talked about how people love to dismiss inter-female competition as a catfight. When in reality, if you actually look at the numbers and the statistics, when women earn leadership positions, they are more likely than men, substantially more likely, to mentor other women and subsequently have other women who ascend to positions of leadership with them. Whereas when men are in positions of leadership, it's not that they don't mentor, they do. And there's lots of good men out there. And I talk about this in my presentation as well. But when men are in positions of leadership, they're more likely to attribute it, again, to their innate ability as opposed to the people whose shoulders they stood upon to reach that site. And they are less likely to mentor, and they're significantly less likely to mentor women to ascend to those higher levels. So therefore, when women are being blocked, per se, or feel as if they're being blocked to reaching higher levels in their aspirations, a lot of times it's because of that lack of mentorship that stands in the way. And they have studied this from an evolutionary standpoint. And this myth of the catty woman or the queen bee doesn't hold up, except for the fact that if you take any individual from any underrepresented group and put them in a room where they are the only one of that group, the natural and innate survival response to that is to become defensive of your position, because when it's made very, very clear that there is only one position available for that token person, then you feel like you have to be protective of it because they've made it very, very clear to you that no others of that group or that kind will be welcomed into the fold. And so it doesn't matter what the situation is. If it is made clear to you, you are the one and only that will be allowed to participate in this, whatever this may be, the defensiveness and that survival instinct kicks in regardless. And it's not exclusive to women, it's not exclusive to men, and it's not exclusive to any minority group. It's all people who are underrepresented.
Wow. Yeah, I remember in your lecture talking about the catty woman and the research that they had they had done, and pointed out that when in these situations, it truly was not the women that were actually more catty. It was the men, as it turned out. Wasn't that right? If I remember correctly?
Well, it's in if you're the situations they studied mainly were in academics and corporate situations. And what they found is that if there was a woman who ascended to a higher position of leadership, she was more likely to mentor and bring other women with her.
Okay.
However, if a woman was blocked from ascending to a similar position of leadership, it was generally because there was a male right in front of her in that hierarchy of power that was blocking it. But if there was not that variable, then it was very common that women would lift up each other and other males to participate and enjoy the success with them.
Okay. Wow. I was the only female in my program for the duration. There was one female that came, I want to say my last year, and she went off to med school. So I never actually had another female like in the program with me. Was that similar to what you guys had?
Very lucky. I think I was the fourth female to go through my program in the history of my program, but I had the second and the third in the program with me ahead of me at the same time.
Okay.
So I did have support, and my program director was very progressive and my chairman was very progressive, and their perception of things were, well, if dental school is 50% female and we want to take the best candidates, period, and we're only taking from half of the class, then we're missing out on the other half of the best candidates for our profession. So they felt like that was a travesty. So there was a very supportive environment in my residency. So I was very lucky also to have that. Now, I still had differential treatment amongst clinical staff and male residents and other male attendings, but for the most part, I have to say, I think I was very, very lucky to be in a really female-friendly environment.
That's amazing. I think I was the fourth ever in my program, and I was the only one there. We did have a female attending. I kind of get the sense, going back to the admissions process, that sometimes if you do hire that token person, in this instance, we're talking about women, it almost felt like, okay, we've got 3 spots in my residency. Well, there's one woman that we like, so we got her. This might just be my perception, but it felt to me that it would be absolutely bonkers crazy to accept 3 women in 1 year, because that would seem biased. Even though the default is to hire 3 men for the past 60 years. Does that make sense? Do you
Oh,
think?
interesting. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, like I feel like it'd be like, oh, well, we couldn't do that, even though you could do that for the next 20 years and never make up for the disparity. How do you think, Kelsey, did you come across anything? How do we get more women in the room? How do we break that barrier of being the one and only? Is that something that society is ready for, or is it something that seems kind of impossible at this point? Or do you have any thoughts for people in leadership who are trying to make things better?
I think obviously context matters, right? So if we're talking women in oral and maxillofacial surgery, that's a different conversation than women in politics and women in, and I have met and thrown my weight behind lots of candidates who I thought would be outstanding surgeons, regardless of gender. And I have met female individuals who felt that they really wanted to pursue oral maxillofacial surgery. And I've had that conversation with them, that difficult conversation, that I'm like, I just have to be honest with you. I don't think this is a good fit for you. So I think within surgery, it starts with you can't be what you can't see. If I had even known, and there were some female oral surgeons in the world practicing when I was going through dental school. I didn't know any of them. I didn't know of any of them. But even just having knowledge that one existed and who she was and where she was would have been astronomically impactful for me, because I would have known that she'd done it and we can do it. And so I think that simply just doing it and then being willing to support other individuals who are qualified, regardless of gender, is really the starting point, and talking about it, just like we are right now, having this discussion and making it clear to our sons and our daughters that we're going to put our weight behind them as long as they put their best foot forward.
Yeah, I think the fact that we had a female oral surgeon on faculty was super impactful to me. I really do not think I would have gone ahead pursuing that had I not met her and been encouraged by her, and to see that she does have a family and she does do amazing work in this field, and being able to see myself in her, I think is so important.
I think it's strange at MUSC, where I went to dental school, we had, I think, one female faculty, oral surgery faculty, and they took 2 residents every year, and each year it was a male and a female. And so I actually had the opposite thought. I thought that it was pretty, like, I knew that it wasn't a lot, but I thought it was more common for women to be oral surgeons because I saw lots of them. And so then when I got to Dallas, I was reminded that it actually wasn't that case. And then because I really didn't do the research on it to really know. I knew that it was a difficult road and that most women didn't choose to do that because we can just practice right out of dental school without doing a residency. And most women go into ortho or pedo, perio. And so I knew that it wasn't a common route, but I thought that it was more common than it actually is.
I think that was really, really an early impact on me, not specifically with surgery, but my mother was a general dentist, and she entered dental school in 1979. And when she entered dental school, there wasn't even a dressing room for the female dental students. It just wasn't really a thing to be a female dental student. And so her experience as a pioneer in that field was very helpful and supportive of me. But I remember very distinctly when I was very young, and I couldn't have been more than first grade, so maybe 7 years old, I assumed that all doctors were women because my mom was a doctor.
Both my
And I
sons think that too.
I know, I love it. And I remember the conversation where it was revealed to me that not only are most doctors men, but the climate is not exactly friendly to a lot of women who want to become doctors. And I could not believe it. I was like, that cannot be true. There's no way. My mom's a doctor. Like, all women are doctors. Women can do whatever they want. How are you telling me that most doctors are men and that a lot of people think women can't be doctors? I'm like, this is impossible. So I think that just growing up in that household and having that foundational understanding helped me a lot when I was in those times when I felt very lonely in my education, when I was going through that surgery realm and that next step.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I'm curious to know more. I think a lot of your lecture was talking about Adam Grant and Sheryl Sandberg and a lot of the research they did. It was prolific, the amount of research that they did in lots of different settings, circumstances. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about some of the high points of the other research that they did and how you really felt as you're reading that. What really struck you?
So the very first article from them I saw, and I am not 100% certain if this was the first one that was published or if it was just the first one that I saw, but I remember it catching my attention. And this was the article that caused me to sign up for a subscription for the New York Times when I had no money as a student. And the article was titled "Speaking While Female." And I'll never forget seeing that title and saying, whoa, what's this about? And basically it focused on studies where, and this was through psychologists and various universities, but the main studies they supported that they cited spoke about how when male executives spoke more often than their peers, they were rewarded with statistically significant higher ratings of competence and confidence by their peers and their managers. Whereas when female executives spoke more than their peers, both men and women, they were punished with statistically significantly lower ratings. And I remember thinking, I have definitely experienced this, that when I have been vocal or spoken up or been the person to ask the question, everyone sits back and rolls their eyes. Whereas a lot of times when it's a male, everybody applauds them and says, oh gosh, I wish I would have been the one that had the courage to ask that. And that was the first article that really got my attention. And it also discussed the fact that the more men spoke up, the more helpful they were perceived to be by their managers. But when women spoke up more, there was no perceived increase in helpfulness or contribution. So what can you do when participation backfires?
Especially when you feel like you already don't belong there.
Exactly. Well, and the thing is you speak up and you're perceived as being too aggressive, but you stay quiet and you're viewed as not being contributive enough or being too passive. So most women will err on the side of saying less because they feel like saying less is going to be more helpful to them than if they do in fact speak up and are viewed as too assertive or too aggressive or too militaristic.
It's deflating, especially as a speaker-upper like me. I can't help myself.
Yeah.
You know, I found that in residency, I've always been a speaker-upper in my life, but in residency, I found that I held back a lot and I only spoke when spoken to, and because I just didn't want somebody to jump down my throat. And I think too that in that situation, I found myself really, I would find one thing and I would dig in on that one thing. And I was, I remember a certain thing that was happening in my residency at the time. And I finally put my foot down and I said, hey, stop, let's listen to this. I just need to lay out all of these facts to all of the guys, and I'm like, I want you to look at this from an outside perspective, not what you think or your experiences, but these are the facts of what's happening right now. And I don't think this is a good idea. And it was really interesting because I felt like when I put my foot down, because I very rarely did it, that, they actually listened. And that was earth shattering to me, because I always felt like they never listened to anything I said anyway. So why bother?
Well, I definitely felt, and still do many times, I feel that when I'm going to really go to bat for something, whether it's a person or a concept or an idea, I calculate and weigh in my mind very carefully the potential pros and cons of taking this thing on, whatever it is. If I'm going to take something on, I don't do it unless I've done my research and I feel very confident that I know exactly what I'm talking about. Because otherwise, if the tiniest little flaw or error is exposed in my argument, I feel like that will derail the entire thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm very, very careful and cautious about how I approach things and how much I look into them and read about them before I discuss anything or present anything.
Yeah. I think the way that I say it is I don't enter competitions I don't think I can win.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is sad because how are we supposed to be challenging ourselves to get better if we aren't stretching ourselves by losing sometimes?
I do think that the culture is changing little by little, and that's very encouraging to me. I also think that the old adage rings true that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I think that some of it is just getting a little more pervasive and perhaps not as blunt, which in that situation, how do you counter that, But I do think, and maybe this is just me wanting to be optimistic, but I feel like in everything I've read and all that I feel like we are making progress. And again, just the fact that we're here talking to one another. I mean, I would have never thought when I was in dental school that a female oral surgery podcast
Right.
would even ever be a concept that would be a thing. I didn't think there would even be multiple female oral surgeons to have a podcast. So, I mean, that alone is progress. And so again, the only way to change it is to change it.
What do you think we can do to change things? I mean, in one end, look how far we've come. There are 3 women oral surgeons on a podcast right now, where again, that used to seem crazy to even find 3 women oral surgeons. It's so hard to find. But on one side, it does feel a little bit like kind of you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. You try to throw your hat in the ring, you try to be vulnerable and put yourself out there, and sometimes it does backfire. So in some ways it sounds very defeatist to me, like, man, no matter what we do, we can't make it better, we can't get ahead. So what advice do you have for people feeling this way, women or minorities? What can we do? Do we just kind of push through, or do you have any recommendations?
I do. So I think there's a lot of things I would like to say about this, actually. I think the first thing is be supportive of all people, regardless of their prototype. And if somebody has a talent for something or an interest in something or a passion for something and they're using it positively, support that. And I say this almost as, I guess I would call myself like a reformed feminist, because for a really long time, I thought that being a feminist meant only supporting women who wanted to have a lot of education and careers. And as I went on in my life, I realized that if you're truly a feminist, it means supporting women in whatever they want to do. So if that woman wants to be a stay-at-home mom, that's amazing. We need to throw our weight behind that. And that is the most difficult job that I could possibly imagine. If a woman does not have the desire to have children, that's amazing. Good for you for knowing yourself. If a woman wants to have children, but she doesn't have the desire to get married, good for you for knowing yourself. I mean, whatever it is, I think we need to just be supportive of other people's choices. And I think it's really important to not be malicious, especially with the competition, like you were saying. A rising tide floats all the boats, right? So if we can all be supportive of one another and not view each other as competition, and realize that the only way that that continued token position is going to keep being a problem is if they allow us to continue to fight against one another. If we all come together and say, we're going to support every qualified candidate, regardless of who they are or what they look like or where they're from, then that ability to marginalize starts to lose its power little by little by little. And I think, again, just doing it, but remaining positive. You got to be positive. You got to be humble. I'm not better than anybody else. I think getting into the education and leadership positions when people are younger, if we can catch them, I mean, shoot, even in kindergarten, elementary school, high school, undergrad, I think the earlier that we can show people that they have support for whatever it is, whether it's science or art or engineering or astronomy, then the less lonely they'll feel and the more likely they will be to follow through with whatever it is they want to do. And
Yeah, I
there's
like
value
that.
in all of those things, you know?
And we need all of those things.
We need them, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to get straight A's to have a value as a human. I
Right.
mean,
And actually, you may be a better candidate if you didn't get straight A's because,
exactly.
you know,
Everybody has something to contribute. Every single person that we interact with has something that they can teach us or some experience that they've had that we haven't had. And we need all of those viewpoints and all of that diversity to come together for commonly supporting one another and carrying the workload. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And I think we can really see right now, too, like how having such a strong cleft between various groups in our country, it just breeds this feeling of scarcity and a lack of safety, and everybody is worried that everybody else is out to get them. And I feel like we really need to counter that by supporting one another politically, whether we have different ideas or socially or culturally, value each other's differing standpoints and try to come to at least some kind of a common respect and understanding.
Something that I thought of as you were talking a little bit before too is that is a little bit of a risk to put yourself out there, but that's what we need. And especially when you're dealing with imposter syndrome, it feels like, well, why me? But my mantra has kind of been lately, like, why not me? Like, I am every woman. I am every woman oral surgeon. I know what it's like to be me. I know what it's like on some level to be you. And I remember thinking, I would love to see more women speakers at AMOS at our annual convention. I would really like to see more people that look like me, have some of the same experiences as me. But I was like, I could never speak. I have nothing I could talk on. I'm not an expert on anything. That is when my imposter syndrome flares the most, is when I'm at those conventions, like thousands of people, and I'm just praying they don't know that I'm just this tiny rural measly oral surgeon who works part-time and isn't doing fibular free flaps with implants while they're in the legs before they move it up. Like, I'm just always worried they're going to find out. So it is a risk when you're feeling that way to put yourself out there. And sometimes people might push back and say, who is this person? And I feel like I've had that a little bit, but I also felt like, well, why not me? If I want more people who look like me, then I look just like me. So maybe I'm the one, and so I started applying to give lectures, and, this will be my fourth or fifth lecture this year that I'll be giving. And I'm not any more special than anyone else, but we're all experts. We all have the degree, we all have the training. And so I'm showing up for myself, but I'm trying to just show up for others too. And so I wish we could dig inside ourselves and trust that maybe when other people selected us, that they saw in us maybe what we can't see, and that we can trust that we do deserve to be there and to show up and to speak out and to be the person who puts their hand up or volunteers to do things. So that's my little plug to push past the discomfort.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you guys have felt this way recently, like I've felt that sort of imposter syndrome. And as I was going to ask the question, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I still do all the time. Erin asked if I wanted to do this podcast. And I'm like, but me? I guess I have time because I'm working part-time, but what do I have to offer? I went from residency straight to the military where I was in a clinic and I was basically an exodontist because you don't get to necessarily choose what you're doing based on your location. You just do what you get. And then I got out and I went into private practice working part-time, and I'm not doing orthodontics. I'm not doing trauma. I'm not taking call at the hospital. And I'm like, well, what in the world can I offer? And so I still struggle with it. Even if I think that I've gotten so much better at all of this, I still struggle with it. And I'm wondering, what can I do? Like, what sort of mantras, like you're saying, why not me? But I think I need to just, I don't know what else to do to try and get past that, to transcend beyond that, or whatever you want to call it. Any thoughts,
Well,
Kelsey?
there's research on that as well, as a matter of fact. And just anecdotally, before I address the research, I do want to say that I deal with this all the time too. When Erin asked me to speak at the conference, I was completely shocked because I was like, who would want to hear what I have to say? And then I spent months and months and months ruminating on it. And then when I told my best friend, who is also an oral surgeon, and he's currently attending at Vanderbilt, when I told him what I was speaking on, he said, why are you talking about that? You don't have that. And I said, I have it every single day. I've just learned to fake it till I make it when I'm doubting myself, and every time I have a complication. But I think that one thing, and again, this is anecdotal, but I think comparison is the thief of joy. So I follow some of these women on social media who I think are remarkable surgeons to a level of that I don't ever feel like I could reach. I don't know that that's necessarily true, but that's how I feel. But one of them is Pat Ricaldi, and she's a craniofacial surgeon in Florida. And I am just kind of in awe of her. And I've tried to retrain myself to, instead of comparing myself to her, being proud of her. And also being proud of me. And appreciating what she does and how she does it, and also appreciating what I do and how I do it, and the fact that I'm trying to work really hard to always do my best. And it really, comparison is always going to steal the light from whatever you're thinking about or pursuing or considering. And so I think we need to change it from, it's not a competition, we're all in this together. And that leads to what the research supports. The research actually shows that when women support each other, we all do better. And this is in sports, this is in education, this is in the corporate world. Almost always, if a woman or a minority is hitting a roadblock, it's not because of somebody from that same group, it's somebody from the majority group who doesn't want them to surpass them. So we need to learn that as long as we're making each other better, even if it's through competition, that's a healthy thing, and it doesn't have to be malicious. But the power of the pack is real. And this kind of goes back to the research that Adam Grant and Sheryl Sandberg did, that basically this myth of the catty woman, the myth of the queen bee, it's actually false. Women tend to have the backs of other women. And if we can all acknowledge that and work on that and be vocal about that like we are right now, it makes it not so weird, and it makes it a very acceptable cultural thing to do. But I mean, the doctors who initially studied this phenomenon were able to prove that these thoughts enter the minds of girls as early as 10 years of age. And so you think about how soon in life it starts. And now here we are, I'm entering my 4th decade. I'm trying to combat something that has been imprinted in my mind, since, the last 30 plus years. And that's just what they could prove in research. I mean, it certainly starts earlier than that. I have a video in my presentation that I share that talks about children's movies and the dialogue in them and the characters and the leads in them. And it talks about most of the movies from when we were growing up. Women didn't have leadership roles. Women weren't main characters. Women, if they were the princess that was rescued by the prince. But even just speaking roles, even in most of the early Pixar films, were 90% plus male. So I think the power of the pack is real, but also just showing up and giving space to yourself and to others. And instead of being envious of somebody who's doing something that's remarkable, maybe being proud of them and lifting them up. And then you can still be proud of yourself too.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about is it Swedish Olympic
Oh, the
skiers.
skiers? Yeah.
Yeah, I loved that. It demonstrated such a beautiful example of exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so this is really kind of cool. So I'm just going to read this from my presentation because I don't want to get this wrong. So it's in the 2014 Winter Olympic Games, the Norwegian cross-country skier Therese Johaug was vying for her first individual gold medal. Fresh off a world championship in the 10-kilometer race, she was now competing in the 30-kilometer. More than a grueling hour later, Miss Johaug landed the silver, finishing less than 3 seconds behind the gold medalist, her training partner Marit Bjorgen. The two Norwegians are the top two female cross-country skiers in the world and very fierce competitors. Instead of being bitter rivals, they are best friends. Ms. Bjorgen, 36, has been the reigning queen for more than a decade. When Ms. Johaug burst onto the scene, a wonderkid 8 years younger, threatening to unseat her, Ms. Bjorgen took her under her wing. She has given me an incredible amount of confidence, Ms. Johaug said, and because she has done that, I have become the cross-country skier that I am. And then I talk about, why don't we ever hear about this? Why don't we hear about stuff like this in the news all the time? And the reason is because the arguments and the fights and the broken wine glasses on housewives shows get better ratings than stories like this. Because people don't want to talk about stuff like this because it's not the myth of the catty woman, right? The people want to talk about the catty woman. That's drama. So ultimately, Marit retired in 2018 as the most decorated Winter Olympian of all time, and she was 36 years old. Therese retired in 2022 to pursue her dream of becoming a mother. She gave birth to her daughter, Kristen, in 2023. And then in August of 2024, at 36 years old, she announced her return to the sport starting in the 2025 season. So I
I
think
just
that's,
think it's beautiful.
yeah.
But it's also scary. It just shows that we're just being fed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we're just being fed this information and we take it as, well, this is the way it is. But it's only because they're not reporting on what's actually happening, the things that we all as women see going on all around us all the time between us and other women. And we know that it's there, but we're not being allowed to see that elsewhere because only the catty woman, only the fights and the broken wine glasses that's what's being fed to us. And I think it's really disappointing. But I think what we're doing here today is a beautiful example of women lifting up other women and supporting other women. And it's not just us, it's happening all over the world, every day, all the time.
Well, one thing that I think is very interesting that I do point out as well is that I'd like you to try and think of course, we know about the queen bee or the catty woman stereotype. What is the male equivalent of that? What is the male equivalent of catty? I don't know of any terminology for that. I mean, what is the male equivalent of the queen bee? I mean, I've never heard that used in a derogatory sense with a male, gendering to that noun. And so that right there, I mean, we're told all the time the biggest enemy of a woman is a powerful woman. But the fact of the matter is, the research simply does not support that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think the message about the young girls already taking that in, that's heartbreaking to me. I have a 9-year-old on the cusp of turning 10, and she is a little misconfident. She knows her worth and sometimes has a little too much ego, and it makes me a little uncomfortable because we're not used to seeing women and girls have that kind of confidence and that ego, and it's kind of a dangerous way to live your life as a woman, really. But I realize how heartbreaking it is. Like, it makes me teary to think about. I don't want her to lose that part of herself.
Right.
And it gets beat out of us. And even in your talk, as we were talking about imposter syndrome, I feel guilty that I have imposter syndrome. So not only do I have imposter syndrome, but I feel bad that I have imposter syndrome because, like, I think from the outside looking in, my friends would say, like, wow, Erin, look at all the things you're doing and you're managing all these different things and great job. And I just feel like, oh man, I hope no one figures out how much of a loser I am. And
Yeah.
I don't want my daughter or our daughters or the daughters of the world to have to deal with that and to feel that way. And it was comforting in a way to see that the reason I feel that way, it's not my fault. It's not my own personality flaw or that I'm just not mentally tough enough to not feel that way. It's because it's been ingrained in us since, pretty much the very beginning. But I think the message of hope that you're talking about is that all ships rise together, as you said. The message of hope is women friendship and women advocacy and women standing up for each other and holding hands and being willing to be there. And that's something I can do. I can do that. I can do that every day.
I think also acknowledging the important contributions of the male allies too, because there are a lot of them out there. I mean, my husband right now is entertaining my 2-year-old so that I can do
Same.
this podcast.
Yeah.
The men who trained me that I spoke about, my chairman and my program director, and both of my chief residents. I mean, just incredible male allies. There's more of them out there than we often realize.
Uh-huh.
And I also think that we could talk for a whole nother hour. I could give a whole another 2-hour lecture on just how imposter syndrome and our cultural perception affects men, in that they always have to be the big man, the hard man, the masculine man. They can't show emotions. They can't do this. They can't do that. And that's very unfair to them as well. And I think that not only do phenomenons like this discredit women, but they discredit the good men and the male allies amongst us. And so I think getting everybody who understands that on board is really, really important, and acknowledging the contributions of those individuals, male and female, that make it possible for us to kind of continue to work towards this cultural change.
I love that. Do you have any other key points you'd like to hit that we missed? Or again, we could talk more about this. Maybe we'll have you on to talk some more extensively in the future. But what's your outgoing message for the people?
I think the last thing that I would say is feminist is one of the most dirty F words. And I want to change that. And if I could say what I would hope our cultural perception of feminist and feminism is or could evolve to be, it would be Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's definition of it in her book, We Should All Be Feminists. I practiced saying her name.
That was really good.
I realize I have a very Midwestern accent, so I probably butchered it, but I wanted to try and do her justice. But in her book, We Shall Be Feminists, she says, my own definition of a feminist is a man or a woman who says, yes, there's a problem with gender as it is today, and we must fix it. We must do better. All of us, women and men, we must do better.
Amen.
Love that.
Well, thank you again. That was
Yes, thank
really
you.
interesting and thought-provoking, and I think our listeners are really going to resonate with the things that we talked about. So thank you for sharing all of your research and
Yes.
thoughts with
Thank you
us
for
today.
doing all of that research so that we could talk about it today. That's awesome.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you guys so
you.
much.
Thank you. You're the best.
Bye.